I am Mark. Happy New Year, Ventham.
And my name is Graham Nichols. Very subdued too.
Very subdued. Clearly not in a New Year kind of mood.
And I'm Katie Holloway. And I just am. That is, I can't think of anything clever off the top of my head. Happy New Year! It's a mind warp for us because we're recording this 2 weeks before Christmas. But have I just spoiled the illusion?
You just spoiled the illusion. Everyone was there, you know, even though people are still in winter jumpers, Christmas festive lights still up. But it could be that in the first week of January.
Yeah. I think this is coming out in the first week of January. It's certainly our first episode of 2024. So, yes. How was your Christmas, guys?
Amazing.
It was excellent. And I'm sipping from my ordinary mug just to bring a sense of reality and ordinariness to this proceeding.
Great.
Well,
for anyone who's not watching the YouTube channel, which is a lot less than listen to the audio only, they miss out on these visual delights.
Visual
or
delight.
do they? Or do they?
They do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast, a crime podcast, actually, while I was showering the dogs. There's a funny spectacle. Because they were really muddy. And I noticed they did too much banter. It was like about a third of the program was kind of banter before they told the true crime story.
Oh, you just don't want that, do you? You
don't want who the
banter.
Podcast is. Some podcasts I prefer the banter to the actual content.
Yeah, I think people say that of us, but let's not go there.
I don't know. Tell us, dear listeners, write in. Tell us what your perfect amount of banter would be in terms of minutes. That would be useful information.
That's assuming we can banter. That's another whole assumption going on there.
We call this banter, but maybe waffle is a slightly better term for it. Have either of you got a New Year's resolution? Okay, the answer is just no.
Well,
do you not plan it in advance?
We're thinking about it. Thinking about it at the moment. Processing. What one?
Always resolving. Always resolving to do better.
Yeah.
Striving forward and all that.
Right. Do you want to hear mine?
Yes.
Sure.
Well, I've got two actually. I'm going to read all the books that I've got that I've not read. I'm just going to put them in alphabetical order and just work through them.
Oh, nice.
To just read all the books that I've been meaning to read and haven't. Some of them you're never in the mood to read Moby Dick, are you? But well, maybe some people are. They're like whales, but I'm not. My other one is to laugh more. That's going to be. I don't know if you can like resolve to laugh more, but if I have that in my mind, laugh more. I feel like that would be a really good one.
Okay.
All right. They were interesting resolutions. They were not like
does
kick
that
some
mean
major sin habit because that needs doing anyway. If that's an issue,
is Stuart's resolution to tell more jokes or something? Then is that how it's going to work? So he's going to tell more jokes. You're going to laugh more, or are you just going to laugh at his jokes?
That would be better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
He's more into theme songs than jokes, actually.
Yes.
He likes to write a theme song for appliances mostly.
Okay. Just laugh.
You should be in our house. It was a laugh a minute.
Just laugh, eh? Just laugh. I'd like to hear those songs. Maybe there could be jingles on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, he would be a good jingle writer,
okay.
I think. He can't sing, though, so someone else would have to do that.
I have read Moby Dick, by the way. Just
have you? Was it worth it?
No, it's boring.
Yeah, I thought so.
I kind of in the end it became like a thing like eating your greens or something, where I just thought I've just got to finish it, but it just goes on and gets nowhere.
Yeah.
Nothing really happens for ages and ages in it.
Oh well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's been on my shelf for 20 years. So.
Well, really want to read that one then.
Yeah.
Put that on the list.
Yeah. Tell you what, you probably have read. The 10 Commandments.
Yes.
That was such a good
10 Commandments
segue into our episode. So, new year, new series. Thought we could delve into the 10 Commandments one at a time.
Is that one a month?
Talk about them. No, one a week. We can discuss that. See how we go.
That would take 10 weeks then, I suppose.
Yeah, it wouldn't take very long. Well, more because we've still got our attributes of God on the last podcast of the month.
Oh wow.
So,
this is a little mini-series, okay.
To mix it up a bit, but
we know how to partay.
Yeah, I feel we did discuss this, and I'm not just springing it on you live on air, but
Yeah,
we'll see how we go. We'll see how we go. How fun it is.
Good times.
Yeah, we know how to have fun. Let's right. This has been 6 minutes, and we have not started the episode proper yet.
That's because of banter.
Yeah, quite. Is 6 minutes the correct amount of banter?
We'll find out.
Yeah. So before we delve into it, let's talk about the 10 Commandments in general a little bit. Maybe Graham, can you give us just a really basic context for what the 10 Commandments are, who they were given to, why, all that kind of thing? Just in case any of our listeners maybe are not Christians or like brand new to the faith, just give them a real what they are. Thanks.
Yeah, they were given to Moses by God to be given to the people. And there are sometimes called the 10 words. They were written on tablets of stone, originally in some way by God. And their purpose, in a way, was to kind of summarize the moral law, I think. There were lots of other commandments that the people were given, but this was at the heart of it. And it clearly has a different significance to the rest of the law, because it was carried around in the Ark of the Covenant, or the 2 tablets of stone were, as though they had a particular significance, kind of elevated them above all the other law, or they were the essence of the rest of the law, and so on. So that's what they were. 10 different commands in different kind of areas, some to do with God. I might say the first 4 to do with God, and some to do with people and our relationships with people. But they're all to do with God, but they're how we express our relationship with God and how we express our relationship with God with other people.
Great. What does the word commandment mean? Just to tack on to the end of that.
You're asking me that question?
Yeah, I still am.
Oh.
If you know, is it the same as command? Like, why do we add the "ment" to the end?
Do you know what? I actually don't know. That's a question I hadn't anticipated.
Oh.
So one of our listeners who sometimes writes in with answers might be just the person who will give us the significance.
Do you know, Mark?
No, I don't.
I feel like it's commands. It's like 10 commands, isn't it? But
I think commandments is. I think it's probably to do with its kind of settled nature, rather than a command is an in the moment instruction.
Yeah. And
I think commandment is something more of settled as part of a covenant. But I'm making this up.
Sounds good though.
Yeah. It sounds plausible. Just go with it, and everyone will believe you.
Yeah. Either way, whatever the word means, they are a settled thing rather than an instruction. I mean, that will be true of lots of God tells us, but they're particularly a settled and a central thing.
Yeah. Okay, that probably leads slightly into my next question, which hopefully Mark can answer. What's the significance of the 10 Commandments? Are they different to the rest of the Old Testament law? Start with that. Are they different? Because they seem to have more significance, but are they, or do we just talk about them more because they're pithy?
Depends what you mean. I think they're different in the sense of there seems to be particularly a much more the time Jesus picks up pretty much all of the 10 Commandments bar the Sabbath. So in one sense, they're reapplied in that sense. They're kind of for all time. The law kind of expands in much more detail what, in many ways, what lots of those commands mean. So yes and no. Yes, no, they're not different in the sense of they are God's word, they're authoritative. Yes, they are different in the sense that they seem to have, that they're kind of the summary, they go forward as well.
Yeah. Okay, so they go forward. Does that mean we still need to obey the 10 Commandments now?
Yes.
Good. That was a short answer.
Well, I think yes, in the sense of how they are then worked out through the New Testament. So I think we have to be careful because not all of them directly. So, for example, it's interesting one, the Sabbath one particularly, how that is worked out. The one of honouring your parents has a blessing attached to land that Paul picks up in Ephesians. So they need to be carefully teased out because Paul is also really clear the law has come to an end. There's a sense of that. So I think they are to be carried through, but they need to be worked through with a New Testament lens, just in how we apply and think through the law full stop.
Great. I look forward to doing that over the next 10 episodes. Graham, what about then the thing about Jesus having fulfilled the law? So obviously we don't obey all the Old Testament law now. We don't offer sacrifices. We don't, we would be happy to kick a goat in its mother's milk, for instance, if we were so inclined. But the Ten Commandments seem different. So why do we have to still obey them? Or should we, rather than a have to, perhaps is the wrong word, but rather than the rest of the law?
Yeah, I think Jesus, by the way, fulfilled the law in the sense that he completed the sacrificial system, sort of brought that to an end. So he fulfilled that. But actually, before that, in his family life and so forth, he was keeping all the commandments connected with keeping the sacrificial law. The law to do with sacrifices. I think he fulfilled it in the sense that, in terms of the kind of the civil part of the law to do with how society operates and so on, he kept that perfectly as well. And in terms of the moral heart of the law, which is mostly what you're getting in the Ten Commandments, I think he perfectly kept that as well. I think because he is the ultimate sacrifice, the sacrificial system ended. I think because the kingdom of God is now people from all nations, not one particular nation. Things that applied to civil society don't directly apply to us. Things that apply to the nation of Israel don't directly apply to us, because the kingdom is no longer a particular nation. You still got to think about the principles that were in those laws and how to apply them, but they don't apply directly. Whereas the moral law, from what Mark said and what the New Testament shows, which is the same as what Mark says every time, is that there is a continuity, and even with the Sabbath one, you got to work it a little bit, but there's something going on to do with the Sabbath, either in principle or in fulfillment or something that's happening in the New Testament.
And it's worth just saying, on that basis, isn't it, that actually the way Jesus, just how we then interpret it, Jesus tells us, which is the law is summarized by 2 commandments: love God, love people, which in effect is the breakdown of the 10 commandments. The first 4 are loving God, the last 6 are about loving people. And Paul says the summary of the law is love, based on that in Romans 13. So the way that then translates back towards it is that's how I interpret the law. That in the end of the day, how is this helping? What's the principle here that's helping me to love God? What's the principle here that is helping me to love people? And the goat being boiled in milk is probably to do with idol worship and fertility stuff and all that kind of thing. So in other words, it's a boundary marker on about loving God. What are there things that I'm doing that are actually not helping me to love God? So the law still works in that sense because of the summary, and that's where the 10 commandments are really helpful, because it summarizes that as Jesus boils it down to the 2 greatest commandments: love God, love people. And those 2 things are interrelated. How I love people will reflect how I'm loving God. How I'm loving God will reflect how I'm loving people. And the law is summarized in that way, and the fulfillment of it is seen in that way. Love fulfills the law, as Paul says.
Right. Let's delve into the first one then, shall we? I feel like I've got a handle on that now.
Well, let me just add another little thing before we do. Well, because I think reach
over my notes to get.
Well, because before we delve into it is worth, we note that actually when the law was given, that it's an act of grace. So the law doesn't. Sometimes we get this in a bit of a muddle. We think the law is all about what they do in order to be God's people. But actually, the placing of the law in Exodus 20 comes after Exodus 19. After God has rescued them out of Egypt, he's called them his people, he's demonstrated his love and chosen them. So you get those kind of, you will be my treasured possession, the whole earth is mine. Then he says, as your God, who brought you out of Egypt and slavery, here's the laws I'm going to give you. Yeah. And we've got to get that the right way round, because otherwise we start to think that the law is what makes them the people of God. No, it's of grace that they're made the people of God. The law is then how they work that out in relationship. Now, that's different to how we do it. There's a covenant framework there. But we just need to make sure that we're kind of clocking that. We probably know it, but it's worth remembering.
Yeah. Well, I wrote that down, actually, that God, he reminds Moses of who he is before he brings the first one. So he says, you just said it. I didn't say it again. So he says that, I'm saying it anyway. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery, out of the land, brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, he says. And then he gives the first commandment, which is, you shall have no other gods before me. So to start with, Graham, what does that actually mean, to have no other gods before him?
Yeah, I think it's part of a piece with what God reveals a lot, that he is the only God. So there's no God to put besides the true God. There's something unique about God and exclusive about God, which needs to be recognized in God's people. And so it's a context where there were many gods, either a particular god with a particular nation, or they worshipped a number of gods, but certainly they would assume the nations around them, Israel, at this sort of point as they're going out into the promised land, the nations they were going to would have either had one god per nation or a few gods per nation, but either way they'd kind of recognized there's your God and there's our God and there's another God over here, and whoever wins is the God that's being successful at the moment. And this God, our God, is saying there isn't any others to put alongside me and make some comparison about we're winning or losing, or we're the better God or the more powerful God or the most generous God or whatever. There isn't any other gods to put alongside me and make comparison.
So is he saying that I'm just way better than all those gods, or is he saying that they literally don't exist?
I think he's saying that they don't exist, and I think it's the language that he uses a lot, particularly in the prophets, about there's no one besides me. There's no other God. So although he's sort of in the way he speaks, sometimes sort of postulates as though there are gods, but then he goes on to say that they're not gods at all. So he accepts that there are things, people, ideas that people might call God. So there are gods in the sense that other people have gods they worship, but in the end, he concludes they are not gods at all.
Great.
Because they're nothing.
Yeah, that's helpful.
And what he's asking for is that we, his people, recognize that and that there aren't any other gods to rival him, because they don't exist.
It's more like a statement of fact rather than there are some other ones out there, like supermarkets, but this is the best one.
No, it's more a statement that in our attitude, we shouldn't allow for there being anything to compare with the true God. So it is a statement of fact, there isn't any others besides him, but it's that we shouldn't place anything beside him. It's similar but distinct from the one we'll look at next.
Yeah.
To do with making idols. It's I think it's more of an attitude. It was interesting. I was reflecting on this. That kind of in a way, the first and the last commandment are quite based on our kind of heart attitude. The second commandment becomes quite practical to do with making idols and idolatry and so on. Whereas this is more of a kind of goes much deeper than that, to our heart in terms of God. And then the 10th commandment is our heart in terms of other people, really, and wanting what they've got. This is to do with wanting there in our hearts to be only one God, because there is only one God.
Good. So Mark, why is this the first commandment that God gave? Like, is this more important than the other ones?
I don't know whether you want to rank them in importance because there's equal, but there is just a primacy, isn't it? He talks of verse 2, I am your God, and the natural therefore you're not to have any other gods. There is no other God. I am the Lord God. And he uses that time, isn't it? Lord your God. It's his title, Yahweh. So it's talking about him in relationship to them. He is the one true living God. Therefore, the obvious starting place, isn't this? In that sense, is there's no one else for you to be in relationship with. There is no other thing called a God but me. Therefore, that's the kind of the relational context, and it kind of summarizes who he is, isn't it? Like at the end of the day, there is a sense where he is a holy God, and he's covenanted himself to relationship with these people, and therefore he is upholding and maintaining that relationship by clearly saying straight from the get-go, this is one of those rules that is not to be crossed. There is no other to uphold that relationship with me.
Great. Right, your turn again, Mark. What would it have looked like then for those Israelites then to have followed this commandment? So then when they were first given those, what would it have looked like for them to obey this?
Well, I think, think about the context they've come from. They've come from Egypt, and Egypt upheld Pharaoh as a god. They would have had multiple kind of animal worship gods. So they would have had that kind of idea. They may have even been carrying, some kind of representatives of that, which would be what, the second commandment begins to touch on. But I think it's that sense of exclusivity, isn't it? That begins to work itself out in the sense of rejecting any notion of any other god. So, rejecting the gods of the land, the Baals, rejecting the kind of the gods of Egypt, and not just rejecting them, not just saying, actually, we're accepting that they are the gods. It's actually saying there is no other god but this one true God, and knowing that within the heart and committing themselves heartways towards loving him and loving him alone, which will then be expressed in keeping the other commandments that will come through and keeping the law as he will then write it. So, of course, after the 10 Commandments, we go into the law, and you're left with this still sense at the end of Exodus of how we're going to have any relationship. Yeah. He comes down, dwells amongst them, and then you get the next set of laws that kind of prescribe how they can relate to him. But the whole time they're learning, here is the one true living God, and this is who we relate to.
Yeah, great. Are there particular temptations that you think that they would have had specifically to do with this commandment? Would it have been tempting for them to go and worship X, Y, or Z God?
Well, there would have been a temptation when you're kind of up against the armies of other countries and you're fearful of them and you believe that they defeat you in battle, and the reason they defeat you in battle is because their God is more powerful than your God. You see that kind of expressed all the way through the Old Testament. You see it in the sense of the fertilities, the sense of the land is producing, how they're going to provide it for. Well, their gods seem to have provided for them. So that's where the temptation plays out, that they're kind of beginning to think, well, these other gods, these lands are flourishing. These lands seem more powerful. These lands seem bigger. These have bigger armies. It must be because their gods are bigger, more powerful, more mightier. And so here they are, this small kind of insignificant nation without a land to go in tents, dwelling amongst, all these others. The temptation would be to go, well, maybe we trust those gods. They look bigger, more powerful. And the command says no. Faith looks like believing who God is and what God says.
Yeah, great. What about today and other faiths? So I guess some of our friends might say something like that it's bigoted or ignorant or intolerant to say that people are only allowed to worship the God of the Bible. Graham, what can we say to that kind of question?
I think it's never arrogant to speak the truth. It would be arrogant if it wasn't true. Mahatma Gandhi famously said, he was asked about which religion he was, and he said, I am a Hindu, yes, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a Jew, and so on. So it's not, if you contrast Christianity with that, Orthodox Christianity, it might sound bigoted to say, oh, that Mahatma Gandhi, he sounded wonderful, embracing all the different religions. Unless there was actually only one God, and this God only stands behind his word, the Bible, and only speaks through his eternal Son. If that were true, then to say there's other things is quite arrogant, because it's suggesting there are other ways to know God, there are other gods to get to know. So I think the arrogance works in the opposite direction, because the arrogance of presuming to know better than God about how many gods there are. Is presuming to have a better vision than God does. So if God says, I'm the only God, and you say, oh, that's nice, but actually I think there's a number of gods, it's you that's being arrogant in saying that. It's not the person who's saying, well, I'm going to trust God.
Yeah.
So I think that's the anti-arrogant argument.
Yeah.
Which I think is reasonable. It's only reasonable if it's true. If we're not really sure any of them are true, then of course, it's best to have as many gods as you can, because you want to hedge your bets. Yeah.
And we accept that, don't we? We would accept that argument if you were talking about, there's one king in this country. We'd say there's only King Charles. If someone said, no, there's multiple kings, you'd go, well, no, there's not. There's just the one king that is recognised. We wouldn't say someone's arrogant for saying there's one king in this country. Yeah. We would think someone else is slightly foolish if they're going, no, there's multiple kings. So that kind of works both ways, isn't it? We accept it on one level because if it's true, it's the reality, isn't it? Yeah. You can't deny that.
But so in Islam, doesn't Allah say he is the only God, for instance? Or, I'm trying to think that other, like Hinduism is actually lets you have a pick of many, doesn't it? But that would say that's the truth, that there are many. So how do we, maybe this is more a slightly different question, but could you touch on it?
Sounds like
Yeah,
a
I
really
think
good guest service topic, Graham, maybe for
Yeah.
February. Oh, there is. Let's see.
on this
February
very
guest
topic.
service, come along.
Okay.
Where we'll be
I
tackling
didn't
this
even
very
know
issue.
that.
Yeah, there you go.
But it's a reasonable thing to make the point that all religions are not the same. In the case of Hinduism and some others, there is a kind of inbuilt acceptance of the fact that there are other
Yeah.
gods, and that was probably more typical of the nations around Israel at the time of the
Yeah.
commandments. That although they were worshipping different gods, they kind of accepted the fact, because you get it in the language when they're speaking to Israel, that they kind of accept, you got your God and we've got our God. There wasn't really an evangelistic sort of Baal worship sort of thing where they're trying to sort of, let's try and spread Baal worship across the world.
Yeah.
It was more that Israel foolishly kind of adopted it at various times. So apart from some religions that might embrace all gods, a number of religions just are mutually exclusive by definition, and Islam would be the classic example of that. You can't say, let alone Christianity being exclusive. Islam is exclusive in what it claims. It's very, very polemic. It's very argumentative, actually, against the way they would say Christianity has distorted the true concept of God.
And they would, you wouldn't go to a Muslim go, no, I agree that Christian God is the same. They would absolutely say, no, it's only their God. So, like the charge often comes at the Christian, but actually the Muslim would agree with us that there's, you can't have, their way is the only way according to them. It's only the fuzziness often of actually the religiousness of people, in this country and other places that actually soften that, make it out like, hey, we're all the same, really. But the Muslim doesn't believe that, nor does the Bible believing Christian.
Right. What about now then for Christians? So I guess on the surface, it feels like this commandment for me is quite easy. Like I'm not particularly tempted to go out and worship Baal, but I think it plays out differently today. Like I think there probably are temptations here for us. So Mark, what is the tension here to obeying this for a Christian today?
Well, I mean, the reality, isn't it, is the New Testament starts to talk about in terms of categories like the world, stuff, all of those things, anything that at the end of the day becomes that I love greater than God.
Yeah.
If the summary is love God, love people, and actually there are things that I'm loving God, they have become functional gods for me because they are what I worship. That's what it's guarding here, isn't it? It's the ultimate behind it is that we are to worship because we're created to be worshippers, and we're to worship the one true living God. And every time I'm tempted to love, I'm giving my worship wrongly, falsely to something else other than God, and I'm breaking this command. And the truth is, we all know that we do this. There are moments, aren't there? And I think it's Kelly. Good things become God things. So we recognise the good things, families, and they become our gods. They become bigger to us than actually the living God, or money, or materialism, or sport, or whatever it is, becomes bigger to us, and therefore actually I am ending up breaking this command because that is what I worship other than the true living God.
Yeah. So how can we, just as we finish, what can we do to kind of help ourselves obey this? How can we encourage each other as we seek to obey this commandment that to have no other gods? What can we, like, practically, how can we try and make sure we're not having other gods?
Yeah, I think it helps to see it through the lens of Jesus, in the sense that we don't become discouraged that sometimes we wobble, and that we are so thankful that Jesus always did what his Father wanted, and in that sense fulfilled that particular command. I think it's helpful to think of it also in connection with Jesus saying, I am the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we don't put anything to replace Jesus as the Saviour.
Yeah.
And I think it is a harder command to keep than perhaps you think.
Yeah. No, I know. I was slightly, being a bit contentious.
Yes, I think on the face of it, it sounds really easy because you say, well, for most of my life as a Christian, I'm not actively thinking I'm going to dethrone God and start worshipping Baal. It's those ways of putting those other things first, but also I sometimes don't believe that God is all powerful and can bring me out of Egypt. Sometimes I think I've got to do rather this thing myself to kind of make it happen. And it's coming back to Jesus is my only savior because God is the only God. And I think the way we can help ourselves sometimes, I think that might have been the question. How do we help ourselves?
Yeah. And others.
Thinking about, I think it's where lots of passages in the Old Testament really help us to behold God, to, read some of the kind of longhand descriptions in some of the prophets, the longer prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, about the glory of God and the power of God and the invincibility of God. And that will encourage us to think that there is no other God. I happen to be reading through Ezekiel at the moment, and it becomes a bit kind of repetitive in a way that there's no other God beside me, and it just keeps going on and on. You think, why is this happening? Well, because we need convincing sometimes that there is no other God besides this God, because there's all sorts of powerful things around us that seem to be powerful, whether they're ideologies or people or the planet itself, which seem to be more powerful than us and maybe more powerful than God. So we do need to keep going back to the big longhand passages that make us stand back and say, yeah, you really are God.
Yeah. That's why I like our attribute episodes so much, that when we, once a month we take an attribute of God and unpick it and just like gaze at him, like it does. Yeah. It does make a difference, I think, when we remember what God is like, that he is the Lord. He is the one who brought us out of Egypt. Yes. And he's good. Like, I don't want any other gods. Like, in my good moments when I'm worshipping God for who he is, why would I want to turn to success or money or my family? Like, they're good things, but they're not God. And you are, and you're so much better. But our eyes slipped, didn't they? But maybe beholding him more will help us.
And one of those things is, one of the aspects of the law, Paul teaches in Romans, is that it actually reveals my sin. So it reveals that actually I don't do this, and I'm in great need of Jesus. And so therefore, in one sense, you've got a little gospel pattern going on there, because actually immediately you're going, oh, I don't do this, but actually aren't I grateful for the Lord Jesus? And so it delights, confession, there's a sweetness to it. It's, that actually God knows our hearts, he knows that, and he, through Christ, has provided that righteousness for us and that forgiveness. And actually it allows us, as we read the Lord, to go, okay, I did break this, but for Jesus. And allows me to worship him, which then restores my heart again to wanting, as to delight in who God is, in his character, his glory, his attributes, and from there as well.
It's like an upward spiral.
Upward spiral.
As opposed to a downward spiral. Yeah. Okay. Anything you'd like to add, or is that us today? Are there any good books or anything that help us on this as well? So I didn't prep you to recommend any books.
As the series progresses, we will think of some good books.
Yeah. There is. I mean, Jen Wilkins got a book about the 10 Commandments, but I have not got it or read it, and this comes out after Christmas, so I can't even drop a hint for someone to buy it for me. But I think it's called 10 Words to Live By, so I think it is I think it's doing what we're attempting to do with this podcast. So unpacking each one, I think.
Sounds like we need to get Jen Wilkin on the podcast.
Yeah, as if she's got her own one. It's great.
So hers reaches an American audience. We reach a UK. Right. You should email her, Katie.
Yeah, I've got her email address.
Go email her.
Yeah, me and one of my other friends were talking about how we're going to have a coffee with her in heaven, because it'd be really fun. Just
reach out to her. Yeah. Reach out to her through Twitter or Instagram.
Yeah, sure. Okay. That's my task over the Christmas holidays.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Mention that you interview the UK director of Affinity, representing over 1,300 churches on a weekly basis. Immediately, boom.
Whether directors or Jen Wilkin, no other gods.
Yes, and Jen Wilkin is not a god, even though she's pretty cool. Yeah. Probably next week I'll think of a wonderful book about God. I'll think of a wonderful God.
There's no other gods, Katie. Not wonderful God. Let's not think about different gods.
Don't invent gods. Yeah, right. Okay, I've got it.
On that bombshell.
Yeah. On that, let's leave. Happy New Year, everyone. Enjoy 2024. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod, that's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.